Hi, this is the engine out of my 1999 Porsche Carrera C4. I've had the engine out whilst I've been doing some work on a new dual scavenge pump, which will be fitting on just here, and also while I've been doing some body work on the car, cleaning up the chassis underneath. Whilst I've had the engine out, I had cause to take one of the spark plugs out here because I've doing some work on some cylinder heads on this other engine here, and I wanted to measure the combustion chamber volume, so I needed a spark plug to fill the hole. When I took the spark plug out, which came out of this cylinder here, I noticed it came out quite easily, which I thought was a bit strange at the time, but didn't think more of it. Anyway, when I came to put it back in, I realised that the threads were stripped on it, and so I've got to do something with the seat for that. So my plan is to insert a time cert into it. In theory, I can do this with the engine together with the cylinder head on, but since it's not a particularly big job to do, as I've already had, the camshafts are already loose on the engine and the tappet chest is loose, I'm going to remove the cylinder head and do it on the bench. So to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is to remove the inlet manifold system. This is in basically two parts. We've got the plastic manifold here, and then underneath that, in there where the injectors go, is a separate metal piece. So I'm going to attempt to take it off in one piece, so it'll come off complete with fuel rails, injectors, the inlet sections and throttle bodies and everything. So I'll get started on removing that and then explain any of the points of note whilst I'm doing it. There's the inlet manifold off the engine. It took me probably about half an hour or so to take it off. There are basically 4 bolts across the inside which hold this metal part onto the cylinder heads. So you bolt onto there. With those 4 removed on each side, it's just a question of undoing a couple of brackets which attach to it, threading through a few pipes, such as this one here, and then making sure that the wiring on each side is all threaded through. So you have the wires for the injectors and the coil packs on each side. I also removed these pipes here for the breather system, and these just go on there and also onto the throttle body at the top. And on the other end, on the air oil separator, they were just detached from here as well. So with those removed, it had to move it sideways to get it around the alternator here. It needed to move over this way slightly, but with that done, it lifted off. So now with this section out of the way, I can turn the engine round so that this cylinder head is pointing upwards, and then I'll be able to continue to remove the head. I might well have been able to do it without completely removing the inlet manifold, because as long as these bolts on here are out of the way, I should be able to just lift the head up. But it's not a big job. The inlet manifold gaskets are very cheap, so for the sake of a few minutes to unbolt a few things and get them out of the way, it just makes for a nice cleaner working area. Here we can see this is a camshaft hold down tool. As I mentioned, these camshafts have been out recently. They're not properly bolted in at the moment. So as you can see, the cover's been off and been cleaned up. So the next thing I'll be doing, I shall rotate the engine round so that this is on the top. I shall then remove this cover again and show you the inside of the cylinder head to show what we're going to remove from there. The oil pump, which is a scavenge pump which pulls oil from the camshaft cover and pushes it back down there, back into the sump, has already been removed. And inside here you can see the chain, the tensioner chain, and to release the tension on the chain, I'm going to undo the chain tensioner, which is there. So I've got my spanner on there, so I need to loosen that, and then once I've loosened that, it'll make it much easier possible to get the timing chain gear off. So first job is to release this, and then when that's released, I'm just going to spin the engine over 90 degrees so that this cylinder head is on top. Turn the engine round now, so I've got this cylinder head on the top. As you can see, I've removed the camshaft cover, and inside there's some assembly lube in here. I'd had the camshafts out before to do some other work on here, and I've been putting it back together, and it was only when I checked when I took the spark plug out that I noticed the problem, so it's coming apart again. I hadn't resealed the camshaft cover, so that was relatively easy to come off, and that's why there's no sealant around here on it. So here we can see where the camshaft's held in place at this end. So this clamp is holding this end of the camshafts down. The other end held in place by these two caps here. This one with an E in front is for the inlet, which is Eingang in German, and A is on the exhaust. You see there's a number stamped on these, 9121 on both of them. The caps are machined with the head, and you'll see the 9121 on there, and it will also be on the camshaft cover as well. It'll have the same number, so the caps, the head and the cover are all machined as one, because these bearings are all actually built in, so they must always match when it's going back together. To make it easier to get the tensioner out on there, I removed the air conditioning compressor, which is basically just these three bolts here. So I just undid those 3 bolts there, one electrical connector there, which is to operate the electrical clutch, and I also removed the belt from there, which just involved putting a spanner on there just to remove the tension from the idler tensioner there. So I've also removed breather connection from there, and there's a bracket which goes on those 3 bolts there, which is to do with the exhaust hanger. So that's all been removed. Next job is to put a tool on here which is going to compress these 2 parts. There's a piston in here which is used for the vario cam. So what that does is it basically moves the slack on this chain either up or down to change the relative timing of the inlet camshaft compared to the exhaust. So the exhaust is always on fixed timing, that's driven from this chain from the engine, and then the relative position of the inlet is changed by, as I say, by basically moving where the slack on this chain is. And it's sprung together. There's a threaded part which will go down through there into that hole at the bottom there, and that will then push the 2 components together just to squeeze them, take the tension off the chain, which will mean that the camshafts at the moment, they're being pulled towards each other. So by releasing the tension on the chain, when these caps are removed, the camshaft will lift out more easily. So clamp on there, release those bolts there, and then also undo these 4 bolts here, which will enable me to remove this gear from here, and then I'll be able to take the camshafts out. There are the 2 camshafts after they've been removed from the head. The covers have been wrapped up separately and put away. These 3 bolts need to be undone. These hold the timing chain control system with this solenoid here, and for the vario cam they held those in place. So with those removed, I've now undone all of the bolts which hold the tappet chest in place. So now the tappet chest can be removed, and then under there we can see the main bolts for the cylinder head. So I'm going to just quickly check all of the spark plugs. You can see the one on the left is almost out. That's the one that I need to fix the thread on. I'm just going to loosen the other 2 and then re-torque them just to check that the threads on there are okay, and then I can undo the large bolts which hold the cylinder head on, which I should do starting from the outside and working inwards. I've just checked the other 2 spark plugs, so these 2 here. I've loosened them off slightly and torqued them up. They both torque up absolutely fine, so it looks like it's just this one here which has got the problem. So I'm now ready to remove the head. I've undone this fitting here, which supports this end of this particular rail, which is one of the support rails. It's not the tensioner one. The tensioner one is down on this side for the chain, sat on there. So I've just undone that. and I've now got to undo 4 bolts. You can see there's one hex bolt down there, one here, and another one here, which I've got the hex key on already. I'm also just going to undo this fitting here just so I can move this pipe out of the way. Then once I've undone those 4 bolts, I will then remove all of the head bolts, starting from the outside and working in, so I'll just do them diagonally across there until they're all out. All the bolts are now out. I had to undo this bolt here as well for this clamp on this line. So with those all out and loose, I've just tapped the head around the edge with a plastic mallet, and it's now loose, as you can see, and ready to lift off. So I'll just lift it off, and then we'll have a look at the inside of the head and the inside of the cylinders. There's the inside of the combustion chamber. Not sure if you can really tell from there, but that's the one with the stripped threads on there, and the others look absolutely fine. Combustion chamber is reasonably clean, bit of carbon build-up, so I'll probably clean those up a little bit. I'll also be checking the head for flatness to decide whether it needs skimming or not before it goes on. Moving over to the block, there we can see the number 4. There's no evidence of any metal on there from where the thread is stripped. And then numbers 5 and 6, which all look pretty clean. So again, they'll all be cleaned up before it goes back on. I'll also be cleaning up all around the top surface on here to make sure that it obviously seals all properly. Here you can see where I'm cleaning up the head for it to go back on. This section down here, I've made a good start on that. These 2 here I haven't done at all yet. The tools I'm using for doing this are these scrapers by Worth, and also this small scrubber here which I'm using with some IPA. So in terms of using the scraper, this is just really used for the sections where there's a bit of build-up, so it's holding it flat to the surface, moving it backwards and forwards. Here you can see where it's taking off the high sections, and then when finished with that, just cleaning it over using this scrubber, which has been lubricated with some IPA, or you can use brake cleaner, some sort of solvent to clean it up. Don't press down too hard on it, just go gently over the surface and let this do the work so you don't get any deep scratches in it. So I'm going to repeat that over the rest of these faces, and then I'll move on to the block. Now I've done most of the cleaning up on the head and the block, so you can see that's a lot cleaner than it was before. And then over here on the block, this has also been cleaned up a lot. There's a couple little areas I'll probably do a bit more on here, but this is mostly finished. You can see I put some tissue in here just to stop any bits going into those bores. So now that that's done, I shall get on and get the new gasket fitted and then get the head torqued up. I've now dropped the cylinder head bolts in place, so I'm going to do the initial torque stage. So here I'm using a dial indicating torque wrench. This needs to be set to 30 Newton meters for the first stage. All this first stage is doing is just making sure that the cylinder head is nice and flat on the block. So we sort of start from the middle and work outwards. So the sequence will be 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see it's basically going sort of diagonally across there. Then 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9, 10, 11, 12. So I'll just start from the inside, work out, tighten those all up to 30, and then when that's done, the head should be nicely seated, so then they can be released for the final sequence. The cylinder head bolts have been tightened up to 30 Newton meters in the correct sequence, then slackened off completely, so that basically settles the head down onto the block. and then they've been tightened up again in sequence to 20 Newton meters. So I'm now ready to do the final 2 stages, which involve turning through a certain angle. So to do that, I'm using this angle gauge. So this basically fits onto there, and then there's this reaction arm. So this basically stops this top section from turning round. So the idea is that that is held still, which I'll probably hold still with one hand, and then I can use a long bar to turn through 60 degrees. So as we can see there, we're looking at around about 268 degrees, and I need to go 60 degrees on the first turn. So I'll be doing that round to 328 and then stopping at that. See, on all of the bolts, I've also marked them just with an indelible marker, just in case anything does go wrong on this. It's just a double check, just to make sure. So I've got a backup plan in case there's a problem using the angle gauge. So that's it. I'm going to get 1/2 inch breaker bar on there and see how I get on. Been round and done the first set, so now I've just got to go and repeat them and do another 60 degrees on each. So I'm using my hand to steady the angle gauge, just to give myself the maximum accuracy. So with that braced, just having a look at the gauge, that's showing about 202 degrees. Need to do another 60, so I'm going to take it up to 262. Nice smooth movement on that. That one done, then move on to the next one. As you can see, it's a relatively quick process. Head bolts all torqued up now. So there you can see the mark on that one where it's gone around 120 degrees. And if you can make them out on these, see the same on the other ones. So it's followed the same pattern as before. Now that's done, the next job, I'll have a quick clean up around there, and then I need to refit the tappet chest. Now ready to put the inlet manifold on. I've got a pair of new gaskets on here. Other couple of jobs I've done whilst the manifold was off, I've removed the secondary air injection system. So I've got a plate on there now, a blanking plate with a bracket for the vacuum reservoir. So the mounting faces on the head have been cleared up there, and also over on the manifold, the faces have also been cleaned up on there. So with that all done, it's ready to drop back in place with the new gaskets on. Manifold is now fitted back onto the engine. So I've torqued up the 4 bolts. It's one of them through here, the other 3 along this side, and 4 on the other side. The 4 on this side I managed to get into with the torque wrench, but one of the ones on the other side, which is this one down in this corner, which you can just see through there. I didn't manage to get into that with a torque wrench because the pipes were in the way above it. So that one's been done as close as I can by comparing the torque with the other 3 along this side. So they're refitted. The pipes along the top for the breathers, and which connect to the air oil separator on here, are all refitted. And I've also rerouted the wiring loom along here, so that's now plugged back in onto the injectors. It'll go onto the coils once I've resealed the head, the cover for the head. And on this side, again, this breather has been refitted on here, and the injector connectors are back on. So I can now turn the engine so that it's upright, so that I can finish assembling the rest of this head. The tappet chest back in, so that's just with a number of these bolts here, all torqued up to 10 Newton meters. This is an experimental tappet chest that we're working with, but it just operates exactly the same way as a standard one. So now that that's in, I'm going to put the the actual tappets in as well. I'm going to put some assembly lube into the holes first before the tappets go in, and then once all the tappets are in, I'll be able to get the camshafts ready for fitting, so I'll show you how to make sure that they're correctly aligned. Okay, I've now put the camshafts back in the engine. For doing the timing on the camshafts, if you look on here, you'll see there's a small dot on this gear here, which lines up with this different coloured link here, and if you can see through on here, there's another, the same on this one. So that if you put those two there and then put them in those positions, then that makes sure that the gears and the timing is set correctly for the camshaft. And then with it in place, the covers go on. They're marked. E is for Eingang, that's for the inlet, and A for Ausgang, which is the exhaust. So make sure they go on correctly and the right way around. And then the camshaft is all bolted in, so it's held in place with this piece here, which just holds the end down whilst it goes in. And then just nip up the bolts which hold it onto the timing chain here. These will be loosened to adjust the timing more accurately when we've got the cover on. And the cover's also been cleaned up, which is here. So this is all ready to go. The sealant has been applied as per the diagram from Porsche. So I'm now going to bolt that in place and torque it down. With the cover bolted back on, I now need to adjust the cam timing to get it right. If you look at the slot there, you see there's a milled slot on the end of the camshaft. That needs to be horizontal. This is the tool that's used for it. So this bolts onto the end of the engine, and then it has a slot which is attached to an arm which can move up and down. So as that arm moves up and down, it's rotating the camshaft, and when this piece on the end fits into here, then it means that that is then horizontal. So this bolts on to the engine like that. Then we loosen off the bolts on here. Then I'll be able to adjust the camshaft to get the timing right, then tighten up the bolts. Then I'll be able to turn the engine over and check it. Okay, so the adjustment tool is now fitted to the end of the engine. This just screws in to make sure that this is held in place. So this can now move backwards and forwards on here. And as that moves, it is moving the camshaft, adjusting the timing on there. So all I need to do to set it is move it until that centre section fits into the end of there. And then when that's correctly in there, then the timing's set correctly. So I can nip the bolts up, tighten them up to 14 Newton meters at the other end. With all the timing now set up correctly, the tensioner can be properly installed. So that's just sort of in hand tight at the moment. So I shall remove that, and then there's an O-ring on there. I'll change the O-ring, put a new one on, and then you can change the washer as well. This engine's not staying in for long, so if the washer's looks like it's in good condition, I'll probably just put a tiny smear of sealant on and refit it, and then tighten that up to 80 Newton meters. Now that we've finished setting up the timing on the engine, the equipment for setting the timing can be removed, and the 3 camshaft plugs can be fitted. So there's one on this side and 2 on the other side. They just seal the ends of the camshafts. That is, of course, after the bolts set the timing have been tightened up in here. It's a good idea, once you've set the timing, just turn the engine over a couple of times and just check that the timing is still correct when you've done that. The cover here can now be fitted for the Vario cam actuator with the bolts tightened up to 10 Newton meters. And then we need to fit the oil extraction pump on here. Now this pump is driven by the slot on the end of the camshaft, and basically it pumps oil from the head here. It actually picks up through this tube here, and it pumps the oil from that slot in the top there out to the slot on the bottom. So this is what the pump itself looks like. So it's got a G-rotor design, so the actual gears are inside there. Now notice on here there are markings on the side. So there it says 1 to 3, and on there it says 4 to 6. Now, whichever bank it's fitted on, those numbers must go towards the crankcase. So this is for cylinders 4 to 6. So this one will be fitted on this way around. Basically, as the pump rotates clockwise, it pumps oil across the right hand side of the pump through here. So it's going to pump oil around from here, around here and out to there. There is an O-ring on the back. Good idea to change the O-ring, lightly grease it before it goes on, then tighten up the pump using new micro encapsulated bolts or with some thread sealant on the bolts to make sure that they don't leak, and then they need to be tightened up to 10 Newton meters. Once that's done, you can then refit the spark plug tubes and also then refit the coils. I'd also check the spark plugs, check the torque on those. They should be done up to 25 Newton meters, just to check them before doing that, and then refit the coil packs. And then once that's done, the rest of it is then just the basic engine reassembly, fitting exhaust hanger and the exhaust, and then obviously putting it back into the car. I'm not going to cover any of that on here because I'm not doing it right now, and I basically wanted to cover the actual work on the cylinder head, not the more general, engine installation and extraction. So that's the end of the video. I hope it was useful. Please feel free to leave any comments below on any other videos you'd like to see, and I'll try and add other videos as I go along. Thanks for watching.